Welcome to this podcast on the uncleared margin rules for OTC derivatives, organised by AcadiaSoft, the leading provider of risk and collateral management services for firms trading in uncleared derivatives. My name is Michael Imson, and I'm a senior content editor at Financial Times Live, the FT's conference division. I'm also a chartered member of the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, the CISI, and the deputy chairman of the CISI's FinTech Professional Forum. With me here in London is Scott Fitzpatrick, Director of Collateral Business and Client Operations for AcadiaSoft. Scott is based at his company's head office near Boston, Massachusetts. Now, the new margin rules for non-centrally cleared over-the-counter derivatives began to be phased in around the world in 2016. There have been several phases, with two more remaining to be phased in this year and next. Phase 4 comes into effect in September 2019. Phase 5, the final phase, takes effect in September 2020. And from those dates, firms will have to post and receive initial margin, which is something most buy-side firms will be unfamiliar with. It will present them with fresh legal and operational challenges. Which brings me to Scott, who knows exactly what these challenges are. But before I kick off with my questions, Scott, can you just please introduce yourself? Tell us about your role at AcadiaSoft.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Scott Fitzpatrick, as you mentioned. I head up the collateral business at AcadiaSoft, and I also look after our operations. I started with AcadiaSoft in 2015, and I was brought in to help build out the infrastructure that supports the phase 1, 2, 3 firms that have gone through the uncleared margin rules and that are currently using our services today.
Okay. What is going to be the impact of the uncleared margin rules for phase 5 firms and their counterparties from an operational perspective?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. I think if you look at it to start, one of the most important things that the phase 5 firms face is just understanding whether they fall in scope for the uncleared margin rules. And for that, it's a matter of them understanding their portfolios and understanding what their average notional amount is and understanding what trades are actually tied to the uncleared margin rules. If they do fall into scope, there's a lot of operational problems that they need to solve or they need to think about solving in order to become compliant. First, they've got to make sure that they have the right legal documentation and paper between their counterparties, mainly the large banks. For the first time, many of them will have to post collateral for initial margin. There's calculating and testing the actual model that they'll use. Most firms have chosen to use SIM, but there is a schedule model which can be used in order to see if they're compliant.
SIM is the ISDA.
Is the SIM, yeah, it's the standard initial margin model. And then there's a threshold, and in order for them to actually post margin, they have to fall above or at the $50 million threshold with their counterparty, and they have to be able to go through and test those things and feel certain about them, testing the model over a 10-day period with a 99% confidence rate. And then after all that's complete, they have to have the ability to post that collateral in a segregated account with a custodian. So there's a fair amount of operational burden that falls under these firms in order once they are in compliance. If the firm isn't in scope or they're not sure, there's a whole idea that, well, when are they going to fall into scope and how do they monitor and how do they make sure that they're in compliance with the rules? So keeping an eye and tracking that, and most importantly there is just having a way to calculate the value of the portfolio.
Now, you've been talking about the phase 5 firms. There is phase 4, which comes in September this year. Phase 5 is September next year. What's the difference between in-scope firms on phase 4 and the challenges they'll meet and the in-scope firms for phase 5?
The phasing is conducted based on the total value of the portfolio. So phase 4 firms were $750 billion notional, and a phase 5 firm is $8 billion. And a lot of people might say that that's the difference. It's really not. I think if you look at the phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 firms, and then you look at some of the phase 5 firms, the amount of resources that are available at some of these phase 5 firms are much different than what's available at a phase 1 firm, for sure, and definitely for the phase 4 firm. Now, there are some very large firms that will fall into scope for phase 5, and some of those firms have a lot of technology resources, they have legal resources, they have industry expertise to really help them comply with these rules. But then there's some really small firms that have larger portfolios that are also going to fall into compliance here. And they need to adopt the technology, they have to have the resources, and they have to have the market understanding to make sure that they can understand what's required of them to comply with these regulations.
Now, buy-side firms, they haven't come into phase 1, 2, or 3. Maybe there was one buy-side firm in 1, 2, and 3. Is that right?
There is one buy-side firm that fell into scope for phase 3.
And then phase 4, hardly any buy-side firms in that.
There's a couple that fall into, but yeah, you're right. It's mostly, I'd say, banks at this point in time, banks and dealers.
But phase 5 captures a lot of buy-side firms, all the significant ones.
I'd say the significant buy-sides will all fall into scope for phase 5. There are still some regional banks and dealers that will also fall into scope, but even many of the banks that fall into scope for phase 5 act more as a buy-side than what a traditional bank would be that fell into scope for phase 1 and 2.
Well, how then is your firm helping buy-side firms address these challenges? You've given us a quick intro to what's coming in, but specifically, what are you going to be doing to help them?
AcadiaSoft is uniquely positioned in the way that we actually not only design our products, but also work with our customers. We started off with the phase 1 firms prior to September 2016, and what we did was we started to form working groups. And we voiced people's understanding of the rules. We took into consideration what they felt the workflow was going to be, and we started to base our products designs and our workflow designs off of the requirements. And so typically, instead of having the voice of one client, we would often have the voice of 100 clients, all trying to kind of boil down what the basic requirements were that they needed to meet to solve for their problems.
And you're actually owned by some of your biggest clients, aren't you?
We are. We're owned by 13 of the world's largest banks and then 3 infrastructure providers. So yeah, we've got a good clientele that helps us to really understand what the needs are in the market, and they're advocates for their customers in terms of directing the products in certain directions. And I think what we've done is not only built that into our products, but we hold working groups to help people understand and educate them on what's happening as they go through the process of complying with the uncleared margin rules. So we have, right now we're going through a process where we're walking all the phase 4 firms through the uncleared margin rules. We're getting them connected with their counterparties. We're helping their counterparties understand who's in scope for phase 4. And we plan to do the same thing for phase 5. So we're already investing some time working with the largest dealers in the world saying, let's compile and understand who's affected in the market for phase 5, and let's make sure we have a consistent outreach and that we're educating them and letting them understand what is going to be required of them as they look at 2017.
When will these working groups for phase 5 start, and how would somebody get on one of those working groups?
So they generally start right after September 2019. We'll start to think about the September or the 2020 phase. I'd say the one thing that we're advocating is we're talking to some of the firms that are following scope for 2020 now is the big message is don't wait. Because what we feel is right now there's about 35 firms that fall into scope for phase 4, and that's probably the biggest phase that we've had since the first phase in 2016. And phase 5 could be anywhere from 200 to 2,000 depending on how people look in terms of the trade size at the end of this year. So what we're trying to do is say, similar to what we saw in the VM rules that were in 2017, where there was a lot of repapering that had to be done with their counterparties, and there was a lot of work that had to do in order to come into compliance. Don't wait till the last minute, get some of that work done now so that we can ensure that you're properly ready for 2020.
Yeah, I see. Now, you've got a suite of services that you call the Risk Services Suite, and that will help firms comply for phase 5 firms. So could you tell us why you created this suite of services and what benefits the users can gain from it?
The Risk Services Suite was built to fill a void that we saw in the market in terms of a technology gap addressing phase 4 and phase 5 firms. And it really starts with our Agreement Manager service. And the Agreement Manager service is a way that people can centralize their documentation with their counterparties and confirm documentation between various counterparties. We then go into the calculation of sensitivities, and calculation of sensitivities, basically we take in trades and we help them calculate their SIM. From there, we can take that information and we can populate it into the IAM Exposure Manager, and we can generate their exposure summaries using the SIM model and also reconcile their trades with their counterparties. And then those exposures that are calculated through the IM Exposure Manager can be sent to Margin Manager, where we can facilitate the margin call process all the way through the movement of collateral through DTCC's margin transit utility, which enables the settlement of margin payments through the custodians. And that's really a full service solution from the issuance of the agreement through the movement of the collateral, and solves all the operational problems of a Phase 5 firm.
Okay, that's clear. That's very clear. There's a lot happening and a lot of solutions available. So how can firms find out more about how the industry is preparing, how their counterparties are preparing, how their peers are preparing over the next 3 months or so?
Well, I'd say, first of all, there are a lot of solutions in the market, and AcadiaSoft's fortunate that we do provide an end-to-end service, but we're also very integrated. We're integrated with all the various partners that are out there providing similar services. So whether you choose to take AcadiaSoft from kind of step one all the way through settlement, that's fine. But if you have a partner service, we're well integrated with all the various partners in the marketplace too. So really, whether you choose us or whether you choose a partner service, we've kind of got an end-to-end solution lined up. In terms of like the next 90 days, in terms of what we're doing to help kind of encourage firms to become more educated in terms of what's happening in the market, we're holding a series of working groups. We're hosting in-person roadshows in key financial centers across the world, whether it be North America, all across Europe. We're having some in Tokyo and as well as Singapore in the coming months. We've broadcast a number of webinars and podcasts that really focus on UMR compliance and operational readiness. And the easiest way to really keep up to date on all the live and digital events that are happening is through our LinkedIn account or coming on and seeing us through our website at AcadiaSoft.com.
Now, these rules have their origin in the Bank for International Settlements and IOSCO. They're global rules, but each country, in the case of the European Union jurisdiction, has interpreted them slightly differently, I believe. Are there any significant regional differences between countries or different ways of implementation that needs to be borne in mind?
The largest one seems to be the requirement for firms in Europe primarily to have some sort of back testing, to be able to back test their model or show that they back tested the model over a period of time, where that isn't the case in North America. But outside of that, for the most part, the rules are very much consistent in terms of the size of the portfolios that force firms into scope, the thresholds that they follow, all those pieces are very much different.
Okay, Scott, well, almost run out of time. You've gone into a lot of detail on these rules, a lot for listeners to think about. What would you say are the key points that you'd like people to remember?
Well, I think the first thing I said was, don't wait. I think that if you feel like your firm is going to be in scope, I think it's time to reach out to your counterparties, reach out to some industry experts like ourselves, see if you can get some guidance in terms of where things sit, and get the process started now, because there will be a large majority of firms that are coming under the Phase 5 umbrella, and we'll be looking for support from both our counterparties and from service providers like AcadiaSoft in the market. So that's number one. I think number two is get an understanding of solutions that are out there that have probably helped firms that fell into scope prior to yours. So how have other firms complied, and how can you follow some of the same operational processes that they've had? Because I think one of the things that is important and that we've really stressed upon is having a common operational process in the market, and having a community of firms that use that operational process is a big win, not just for the individual firms, but for the industry in general.
Thank you very much, Scott. That's all we have time for. It's been a fascinating discussion, very detailed, complicated set of regulations, and going to be difficult for the buy-side firms to, in Phase 5, to comply, but with the sort of support that you're offering, I'm sure they'll all manage. If anybody listening has any questions or queries, you can just visit the AcadiaSoft.com website. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.